Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first AppSheet Office Hours of the year. My name is Lauren, and I am a content manager on the Google Cloud Community team. Today, we have several members with us from the AppSheet team who will take us through a recap of AppSheet platform updates in 2021, as well as a preview into future updates coming this year. Then we'll give a brief overview of the new AppSheet community site and have the remainder of the time open for Q&A. Questions are definitely encouraged throughout the session, so please feel free to add those to the YouTube chat box throughout the session, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. The last thing to say before we get started is just that moving forward, office hours will be held on a monthly basis, including members from the AppSheet team, and topics will focus primarily on addressing product-related questions. So stay tuned in the community because topics, dates, and how to join will be shared with you there. Okay, and with that, we will hand it over to Peter and the AppSheet team to take us through.
Hey everyone, and thanks Lauren for kicking this off. Real excited to be using YouTube Live. First of all, this is a first for AppSheet, and so real excited to be on YouTube with the AppSheet Office Hours, and looking forward to kind of running through some of these updates, sharing some of the recent updates with the community, and then also diving into some of the live Q&A. We have some questions that have been contributed from the community, but also really curious to hear any questions you have right now live in the chat. And so we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll try to get into as much of the Q&A here in the back half of this as possible. So if you can see that, I think just any comments in the YouTube feed, that's what we will be scanning through. Really nice to see greetings from all over the world. So thanks everyone, and excited to have you here. The first topic on the agenda is just AppSheet, sort of a reflection on some 2021 highlights, and then a more forward-looking sort of plans, some previews for the plan for 2022, and what are some of the things in the works right now for the platform. And for that preview of 2022, I'll hand it off to, and actually Matt Zito, who's a product leader here on the AppSheet team. Let's see if we can add you. Oop. There we go. I think Matt, just to introduce you to the room. Matt has been with Google and with the Workspace team for some time, and also now has been leading on the product side at AppSheet. Matt, do you mind just kind of sharing some of this reflection on 2021, some of the highlights from new functionality added, and then some of the investments going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And it's great to virtually meet everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. For us, automation is a key investment in 2021 and will continue to be a key investment going forward. One of the things that we want to do is take is to offer an automation engine that scales for apps, but also for a variety of other use cases. And so we launched the first version of automation earlier this year, and we continue to make incremental improvements to cover some of the gaps that we heard out of the feedback from the original shipping release. And then on the dynamic emails front, this was an extremely exciting one, which is to say, leveraging the AMP email capability that's in Gmail to allow you to actually ship views that you can interact with directly from your email. So this was a very exciting feature for us. I think it really, when we think about, we'll talk about this more later, when we think about how we can work with surfaces like Workspace, right? Even as AppSheet, being able to allow app creators to put views in the places where their users already are is an incredibly powerful value proposition. The easier that we can make that, I think the more successful we will be, and I think our app creators will be. And then on the governance side of things, as AppSheet joined Google, the scale of our customers increased significantly. And so one of the things that we've recognized is that the need to put complex, or I should say sophisticated, information governance and policies on top of apps and app creators within an organization is extremely important. And so we've been investing in a variety of things such as team management via workspace OUs and Google Groups, APIs for reporting, and then we continue to have planned enhancements in this area around things like app-only users. So you can more, especially in large organizations, you can more finely tune access to both the app creation experience as well as the app user experience. And then in 2022, there's a couple of areas, and Praveen or Peter, feel free to chime in on this. The first is we really want to invest in our desktop UI experience. So certainly we know that AppSheet apps are incredibly powerful on mobile, and they obviously they work on desktop, but certainly we've heard the feedback from our users that simply translating or simply moving the mobile experiences that we offer to desktop doesn't work an ideal way, right? There's different patterns, there's different semantics that people expect on a desktop application. And so we've made it a priority to invest in that end user app experience on desktop, specifically because we want app creators to have the power and the flexibility to say, this is, whether it's a desktop app or a mobile app, it's going to look great in both places. Similarly, as we announced last year, the tables team from Area 120, that was a sort of startup inside of Google that offered a really great data management and editing interface for structured data. They joined our team last year. And in 2022, we plan to launch a first-party data source experience. That is, certainly you'll continue to be able to use external the data sources that you have available, but we also want to add the ability to use native tables and edit those and interact with that data directly from AppSheet. So that obviously we think for app creators not only offers yet another possibility, it also reduces the complexities of these applications because you don't need to worry about configuring or excuse me, being dependent on external data sources for what is successful. And then on one of the other major priorities for the year is AppScript integration. So we see AppScript as an important part of our ability to address more unique and sophisticated use cases. The AppScript is already used by millions of users to create automations, extend workspace, add new capabilities, automate repetitive tasks. And so adding the ability to the first steps of adding the ability to add AppScript to automations and tasks really just opens up the floodgates in terms of what you can build with AppSheet automation. And we see that as really the first step there. Peter, Praveen, anything that you guys wanted to add on that?
No, this is a great high-level view. Thank you, Matt. I just wanted to say hello to, some of you attending. You know me. I know you too. It's been you've been long-time users of the platform. Thank you. And those who are new, welcome. And, yeah, we'll I think cover some more detail in this, driven by the questions.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. And as you said, before we kick off the Q&A, we will take just a few of the next minutes to review the new AppSheet community site. and then we will dive into your questions.
Hey, everybody. I'm Andrew. You can find me in the community at Andrew B. I think to kick off, Peter's going to take us through some of the high-level community migration goals, and then I'll take you through the site itself, as well as the direction that we're going with the community for the next year.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so some folks here I think are brand new to the community, and then others, like Praveen mentioned, have been around for a long time and have seen sort of the evolution of the community resources and just the forum as a whole. And for those folks, you've been through the recent migration, and we really appreciate everyone's patience and flexibility, because changing this environment, it means moving stuff around, and it means kind of refocusing where some of that functionality is and how it works, and that can add friction. So we appreciate everyone's patience as we move things over. Overall, it's been a huge success, and Andrew and Lauren are largely responsible for that. There have been a lot of user profiles and a lot of content, a lot of knowledge from everyone in the AppSheet user base that has been moved over into this new Google Cloud community environment. Really excited to be there, closer to other Google users using all sorts of other different products. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate a few goals for this new environment and sort of the migration process. And the first and foremost is just ensuring that AppSheet users continue to have better tools for just quickly finding answers to their questions, right? That's sort of been the heart and soul of the community and everyone. Most of those good insights and answers are coming from other app creators. And so we really want to make sure that that is promoted and available and can continue to be optimized and be improved as the number of people using AppSheet grows, and it's growing a fair amount these days. So the other key priority here is for the AppSheet team, and also just broader Google team, to have better tools for listening and monitoring the feedback from the user base. That's something that's been, I think, difficult to do very reliably in the old environment. And so this is going to be a really deliberate area of focus moving forward. And I think there are new ways of the team to just better listen and engage with all the feedback and feature requests and questions from folks about features. And then the last, just a key point here that I kind of alluded to, but having these AppSheet resources and having the community more directly connected with these other platforms and other products that are becoming really closely integrated and connected to AppSheet as a whole. And so it's important that the community and also some of the support resources and just knowledge base be also really closely connected to these other platforms. So I'll leave it at that, but just for some context of this recent migration effort. And Andrew, did you want to kind of touch on the overview?
Yeah. So I'm assuming most of you have seen the site if you're here. If not, definitely go check it out. It's at the same URL. I think the two places in the community I wanted to point out to you today are, first, the release notes and announcements. So you can go to the release notes area and you can now click subscribe to get notified on when they get posted. And it's almost every day that there's something new coming out. And the announcements is going to be the same way it was used before, where there's going to be product updates there, but also this is also where we're going to be sharing information about the community. So look out for kind of new ways or new pieces of content coming there. I think you've already seen highlights of some of our community members that we posted last week, which is awesome. And we plan to do more things like that to recognize the people who make this community great, which is all of you. The second thing I wanted to point out is you'll notice that the feature ideas, as Peter mentioned, is slightly different in this new environment. Mainly, there's two things. One is each feature idea has a status. And that's we're working with the teams now to kind of build out the process by which we review and respond to these ideas, as well as keep them up to date, right? Which is a big task, right? With a platform that's constantly innovating. But we're committed to this. The second thing you'll notice about feature ideas is that it's you're no longer limited to the number of votes. So you can go in there and you can vote on all the ideas that that you like. Obviously, we still want to encourage the best ideas to float to the top, because that is a great indicator to the team of like what has the most value. Matt, do you want to talk a bit about how engineering kind of will be using this to kind of listen and how it works within the product lifecycle?
Yeah, absolutely. So our product managers, and certainly a number of our engineering folks and designers as well, look at the community discussion more generally, right? But also the feature ideas. And so, for example, a PM who's considering, expanding a particular capability or revisiting a particular part of the platform will go back, search, look at previous discussions, right? Feedback that people had organically about their experience using the feature. They'll look at feature ideas that might be relevant to that. And we do our best to incorporate that feedback into the experience of when we're going to go and touch those features. In some cases, we aren't able to tackle a particular request or idea in the near to immediate term, either because the system that it's wired up to, touching it requires significantly overhauling it, or investing significant effort, or is just it's not necessarily aligned with where we're trying to move the product over the next few quarters, right? While we're inside of Google, and that comes with all kinds of exciting opportunities and capabilities, we are still, a limited pool of people who can write code, and unfortunately we can't get to everything. But it is a key part of our overall process, and I know we're going to talk about the office hours going forward on an ongoing basis, but certainly having product managers participate on an ongoing basis in these office hours are another great way for us to, discuss these ideas, get feedback, and integrate that into the process of building the product.
Awesome. So, of course, the community wouldn't exist without all of you as members. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. Steve, Lucinda, Subret, T. Canelli, Willow Mobile, Oscar, Lynn, Multitech. I mean, it's been really great to get to know many of you as I've gotten involved. But so many of you contribute your time, right? I've heard countless stories of people who came to get a question answered. They kind of stuck around to grow their skills, and then they started giving back, right? And helping others just like they were helped. So I just want to take a moment to recognize all of you. If you see these folks, or if anybody's helped you with a question, like go in the community and like send them a message, right? Tell them thank you today. We want to encourage that kind of behavior, and also recognize those who are making this community great. So Thank you, everybody.
Andrew, if I can jump in, I see the names here on this slide, and it's like seeing names of family, because you have over the years, these folks and many others have done so much for everybody else. So they're all familiar names, all done it for a long time, and completely selflessly. So it's a huge kudos and appreciation. This is very uncommon and special.
Absolutely. So I also want to touch on kind of what's coming next. The next thing that we're going to do as the community team is we're going to spin up what we call a community advisory forum. So this is a smaller group of individuals who will get together monthly to provide community feedback, really represent all the members, but in a smaller format that we can work through, any issues, go through any kind of changes or enhancements that are coming to the community platform, as well as get direct feedback on new community programs that we'll be thinking about and that we want to spin up over the coming year. So we'll select a small group to begin with. There'll be more opportunities to join probably every 6 months. So we're excited about setting up this group to kind of really invest in the long-term success of this community. And then lastly, thanks to everybody who's already given your feedback on the platform. So I wanted to share some insight in kind of what's coming now as well as what's coming next. And I encourage you to continue giving feedback into the feedback area of the site. What you'll see next week is we're working on the reduced white space, read versus unread messages, clicking and getting straight to the latest post. And then we're also working on longer term plans for a really increased feed density, a dedicated notification center, so you don't have to leave the page that you're on to kind of see what's the latest notification for you. So we're excited. We're continuing to invest in the platform, and thanks again to all of you who are our members.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And with that, we will now dive into the Q&A and take the remainder of the session today for that. So we will first start with those that we saw come through and that were posted in the community. So thank you for sending those through. All right, let's get started. Okay, so our first question is, how will AppSheet be integrated into the Google Workspace brand in the future?
Sure, I can take this one. So I think it's important that we sort of divide the two considerations here, right? One is when we say workspace brand, do we mean the actual sort of brand marketing and identity? And then the other is, the technical integration and how the products fit together. And so I want to sort of delineate those. On the marketing side of things, we certainly, we're Workspace and AppSheet are both part of Google Cloud, right? So we obviously have a lot of alignment with them. We also have shared events. And so, for example, AppSheet was in Workspace's keynote this year at our cloud conference. So we certainly have a good partnership with those folks, but we are, separate and distinct. On the product side of things, obviously, we want to continue to support an ecosystem of connectivity and connectors and integrations and touch points. But certainly one of the things that we do hear from our users in a lot of cases is that they would like for the products, for Workspace products and AppSheet to work together more seamlessly, right? And so I think a really good example of that is the dynamic email or the AMP email launch that we had earlier this year, where that's an open standard that anyone can implement, but its primary user is Gmail. And so we can give an enhanced experience and a really nice experience when from those two products working together. We're going to continue to look for those opportunities in the coming year, but not to the exclusivity of everything else that we support today or that our users need.
Great, thank you. Okay, for our next question, which platform changes were pushed to follow Google policies? Can you provide an explanation on how these changes help improve the experience for app creators and end users?
Yeah, Lauren, just to jump in, and Praveen, if this is something you can help provide a little context for, I think that'd be helpful.
Sure.
I'm interpreting this question to be sort of thinking about the last couple of years and where some of the energy has been focused, besides some of these highlights we talked about from last year, just where some of the engineering energy is being focused, considering all of the migration, integration efforts.
Yeah, let me take that just to provide some also longer term perspective on this. AppSheet was acquired by Google about 2 years ago. One of the important things at that time that we put in was a consent dialogue. And that was an important thing that, there are app creators who build apps for app users, and there's information being collected. But without following some of these, rules that have come in a lot of places, a lot of countries around the world, around making sure that user consent for what those applications are doing. So many of you would have seen around that period of time consent dialogues that originally were sort of mandatory, and then subsequently we made them optional depending on the particular region. So that, I think, is a really good thing that protects actually much more so than platforms, really important thing that was top of mind in Google and protects all app creators because it makes sure there's better conformance and compliance. That's sort of one example. But to Peter's broader point, a lot of the work in the last 2 years has really been, in some sense, I'll give you an analogy. AppSheet sort of started out like a small little settlement, think of it like a village, and grew rapidly, right? And it continues to grow rapidly. Lots of users demanding lots of stuff, and just like in any city, a village that becomes a city, some of the infrastructure is not quite right. It's not ready for more further expansion. You have to sort of go back and reinvest in better roads and better bridges and better plumbing and better electric lines. And so that's really a lot of the work in the last couple of years. It's less about conforming to Google policies, but more about putting the infrastructure in to be able to scale around the world, run in different data centers, reliable, have the ability to make changes without breaking everything, which we had this problem earlier. And so we have made a lot of strides to improve on that front. So there are sort of investments you have to make at some point that allows you then subsequently speed up. So I think that's where most of the platform changes have been, is infrastructural. As users of the platform, you don't see them directly, but you see their side effects. And those side effects are that we will be able to scale better, have more people work on the project at the same time without each person stumbling and stepping on each other, and so on. And one of the things we try to do is, through these changes, keep deploying the product every day, as we always have done. That makes sure that there is that cadence that allows us to pick that up and continue. It's actually quite rare in enterprise software or business software to be able to maintain that cadence. So we've been trying to maintain that.
Excellent. Thank you. So moving on, how can we know the current status of features on the roadmap? Particularly interested in AppScript outbound channel, iframe UX, and the new chart editor.
Yeah, Lauren, I can take this. So, and I think that this also is a good segue from some of the comments earlier about the feature ideas section of the community. Mm-hmm. And so to kind of break this into two parts, and just to reiterate that sort of the efforts there in the feature ideas section. If you haven't been there yet, feel free to go ahead, and in the main community, you'll see it as a top level nav feature ideas section. And also, Matt, just to extend some of the comments you made around how the team regards and listens to that feedback, right? Those community originating features. The team will be working on updating the status of each of those requests in order to give some indication of how it's being considered or being worked on, or just being put on the back burner or set aside, not being invested in. And then, I guess more broadly, for many other features that are being introduced or worked on, the team, and I know you probably have seen many of these from Arthur in the past, but the team will be posting opportunities to access beta features like in the preview program. And so these are, with those posts, there are updates that are shared and feedback is gathered. And then also that I think there, depending upon what the feature is, there are also opportunities for more direct conversations with different user groups and live chats with folks in order to get feedback on how things are going, and then share some of those updates. I would start just as a whole for everyone's reference. I would definitely follow the updates in the announcements section of the community and also the release notes. And you can do that in a granular way if you want to follow a particular updates regarding within a particular part or section of the platform by getting updates from specific labels. So if you're particularly interested in automation updates, then I would follow that label in the release notes and in the announcements to look for some of these opportunities to participate in the preview program, or just kind of hear the status of features as they're being introduced. And then I just to touch on that preview program again a little bit. For those of you that are unfamiliar, you can gain access to some beta features like new charts or new view filtering options are a couple examples. If you go to UX in the editor, if you go to the UX and options tab, and then you enable preview new features. So these are a few things just that I think came to mind related to this question. And then, this specific interest. I'm excited that AppScript is a focus this year. And so I think you received a status update there. The new chart editor, that's something I mentioned that's in the preview program is still in beta stage. And then iframe, there's been a lot of discussions around iframes and different ways of using them, security implications, authentication implications. That is still a work in progress. And I personally don't have an update there, but those are the types of things that we'll try to dedicate updates and push updates in that part of the community for everyone.
Peter, can I add one thing to this? It might be useful for folks to understand. As a larger team, than we were before and at Google and so on, we're more structured in the planning process than the complete shoot from the hip approach maybe from 3 years ago. We tend to plan the work of the team roughly in six-month chunks. So there's sort of a plan, a roadmap, if we wish, for H1, first half of 2022. And typically then there's a sort of plan put in place around the middle of the year for the second half of 2022. They don't go, make hard right turns and so on, but they try to be consistent. But that's sort of the granularity at which this planning occurs. And the product managers, Matt being the leader of our product management team, Peter part of the team, are the sort of owners of the plan, of the roadmap. And then the team executes on the sort of the broad categories of the roadmap, and the individual items then go through in the community, there's sort of, as Peter mentioned, there's sort of guidance about, hey, we're starting to work on this, or here's a preview of it and so on. So that just sort of gives you a sense of how the process works and structuring the roadmap and then communicating it.
Great. Thank you all. Okay, moving along. When I build an app, it contains client's data. If I'm using Google Sheets as my data source and the client wants to know how secure the data is, who do I refer them to? How can I know if I'm compliant with privacy laws and regulations? And then additionally, as I work as a consultant and when I purchase an app, I require that the supplier provide a detailed document about the data. So as a creator, how can I provide the same?
Peter, you want to go? I could take a quick stab at it too, if you'd like.
I have a quick answer, but then Praveen, if you want to. I wanted to first recommend, if you go to appsheet.com and you look in the footer, there's a link to a page called the Trust Center. And that's a good starting point, I think, for understanding how some of the architecture and security of the platform as a whole. So I'd recommend that as a good starting point. I also wanted to make the comment that I'm unable to provide legal advice. Praveen, I don't know if you, and also I guess add the context here too, that I believe this is a question from the perspective of, I think it's implied that this is someone who's building apps on behalf of other teams. And so I think there are unique considerations there for how data is shared and how that information gets to them. Whereas a lot of us are just building apps for our own usage or our own team's usage. Praveen, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I just actually wanted to echo that. There's sort of different models, right? Are you building an application for your colleagues within your company, or are you building something for external users to use? Things like privacy and so on, you as the app creator, you actually really need to understand the regulations of the environment which you're working and your users are working. That's not something that's sort of one answer fits all. It's not something Google does. We're providing a platform. Again, as Peter points out, none of us here on this call are lawyers, but this is more of a question to understand whatever platform you want to use to build applications. There are some contracts you need to have between you as a creator and your users, and the privacy laws and regulations around that, whichever platform you use. So I think that's sort of an important thing since you bring this up. At the level of the technology, platform technology, we have articles and documents about, how how this platform is secure, what information is recorded, what's not, etc., which can help you put together your privacy policy for your application.
If I could add one other point to this very quickly, just from my time on Workspace. So obviously, I think, also not a lawyer, although my mom probably wishes I had become a lawyer. But if we're specifically talking about Workspace here, right? So all the advice that I think Praveen and Peter gave is excellent general ways to think about the problem. With Workspace in particular, they publish their own white paper and support articles on their data handling and data security policies, which you can get if you search online or by contacting Workspace support. So if we're specifically talking about Google Sheets, and there are actually, there are actual documentation and policies that they offer around the data that I think are just important to consider if in particular you're using things like Sheets as your data source. Does not to disagree with any of the other advice, just to also think about Workspace.
And also to build on that, AppSheet also has what's called a DPST, data processing and security terms, which is on the website, which lays that out for AppSheet as well. So that's just useful information.
Great. Thank you all. Okay, just a few more from the community here. What is the difference in features and license types between an AppSheet Enterprise Plus license and a Workspace Enterprise Plus license?
Yeah, so I can provide a high level here, and I see a bunch of other live questions, or not a bunch, but a few other just related to sort of pricing and SKUs as a whole. I think from a high level, what's important to understand is that there are Workspace licenses and there are also AppSheet licenses. They have the options within each have similar names. And so I think that's one aspect of this question, is that there are AppSheet Enterprise Plus licenses, and those are consumed independently of the Workspace Enterprise Plus licenses. Some of that detail is on just appsheet.com/pricing, along with some of the differences. I know there's I think there are a few other questions related to just what are the differences in feature availability, and also just kind of license details between some of the more self-serve plans versus the enterprise plans. And so the first distinction here, I think, is important to know that yes, the Workspace licenses are independent from the AppSheet licenses, including these Enterprise Plus level licenses. Then separately, the differences in features, I'll keep this high level, but one of the main distinctions to be thinking about between enterprise class licenses versus what's commonly referred to as sort of like self-serve licenses are the team and governance controls that you gain at the enterprise level, and there are different types of those in each of the enterprise plans. But from a high level, just since for the sake of time, we can't get into all the specifics. But as you're thinking about licenses and enabling AppSheet for a team of users and ensuring that the team is secure and governed, and has resources shared in all the right places, that's generally when it's best to be thinking about those enterprise licenses. There's more detail there we can follow up on. I'm glad to actually on a lot of these Q&A, since we're not gonna have time to get into all the nooks and crannies. If a thread for this doesn't already exist in the community, let's just get it started, and we can tag all of us, and we can just chime in with all the details and link out to any specifics if anyone else wants to jump on that thread with follow-up questions. So I'll pause there. Wasn't sure if anyone else wanted to add anything. Should we keep moving?
Yes, and also just to say that we will be posting the recording and you'll be able to view this on demand in the community. So feel free to add your questions there if we don't get to them on that post as well. Okay. All right, so will pushing an AppSheet app to another Google user expose the app backend structure on that account if they sign up for AppSheet as well? Some concerns are if someone makes unintended back-end changes or if someone redistributes a rebranded copy of the app without consent.
Yeah, I can chime in here. From Mads, just as a starting point, and especially for those that are newer to creating and sharing apps with other users, I think let's just use an example of there's a Google Sheet that is serving as the app backend structure. And then an app has been created on top of that. When you invite users to use that application, they will not necessarily have access to that Google Sheet. And so I can share some specific examples of this. And actually, this is another good example of starting a thread, and we can point to some of those security controls because, but as a starting point, your app users do not need to have access to that Google Sheet backend as an example. But the way that they access the data from that backend source can be controlled in the security settings of the application itself. And that can be done in a few different ways. So just filtering what records get shown, whether or not records are shown based on the permission that they have to that backend source. And there are a few other, I guess, considerations there for how you can kind of securely filter what your end app users are able to see. But as a starting point, it's good to understand that they do not need to have that data source shared with them necessarily. The second part of the question here around making unintended backend changes, I think that alludes to that a little bit, that it's good to have that sort of secured backend data source so that the data schema doesn't accidentally get updated and then potentially introduce errors in the application. For redistributing rebranded copies of the app, I think this alludes a little bit. Everyone as an app creator has the ability to create app templates or sample apps. And when you do that, that does give other users the ability to copy the application, the app definition, and the connected data schema and data content of that app. So for that part of the question, that is something that you should be fairly cautious with and careful around. What are you enabling as a sample app or as an app template? Because it is giving people the ability of copying that backend data. So oftentimes you want to prepare an application to just have mock data before you make it available as a team sample or as a public sample. Praveen, any other thoughts, or otherwise I think we can keep moving.
Okay. In user settings, I want to include a simple checkbox and blurb allowing users to opt into my email list. What is the easiest way to accomplish this in as few steps as possible?
This is a great community question, and I think there will be 10 experts who will answer that with probably overlapping answers. But yeah, it's just like a form. You provide a couple of, I guess, your checkbox and the blurb. And I think, yeah, just great question. Post in the community. You should have an answer within a few minutes.
Just to add on to that, I have an example that I'll add and I'll reply to Agent 5D. Sorry, I don't know your actual first name, but I'll reply with an example of that because, like Praveen was saying, I think there are a bunch of different answers to that one.
And one of the reasons I say that instead of just answering it here is then for the next many years, anybody who asks this question will see the answer, and that's the beauty of our community. So that's why I love to have the answers there rather than buried inside a video.
Praveen, that actually reminded me to just make a pitch for the flagging an answer as the correct answer. Or Lauren, can you correct me on the terminology in the community?
Yeah.
You want to flag the answer. What is that called again?
You can mark a response as an accepted solution. and that helps create visibility and mark a question that has a correct response. So it makes it easier for people to find the answers that they're looking for. So it's called accepted solution.
Thanks. Yeah, that came to mind earlier, just looking at the leaderboard list, because that's essentially a way of like giving kudos to other folks too. So yeah, great.
Exactly. All right. I think we just have a couple more. Can you explain how to import data from documents on Google Drive?
I'll hop in again here, and I thought this was a good one. Just to explain a couple of concepts, but Sarah, I think you since we added this question, you elaborated a little bit, and so I think we'd know more of the specifics of your question. But I wanted to first start with the idea that so that everyone's on the same page. This is referring to the ability, you can, when you're creating an application and you're connecting data sources, you can connect to the data source itself, like a Google Sheet or an Excel sheet or a SQL database. And that's represented as a table in your app definition. You can also, if you haven't yet discovered it, connect to a Google Drive folder. And you can connect to those Google Drive folders and use that folder in a structured way, have that those files kind of exposed in your application in a structured format. And you can do it in a couple of different ways. One, you can just access the folder and any of the files in that folder, and then expose that in a view in your app. And then the other, which Sarah, I think is getting at more specifically, is you can use Document AI to select what type of file is in that Google Drive folder. And then every time you add that type of file to the folder, AppSheet will run it through Document AI processor, a Document AI model, and then extract those fields and to be usable in your application or in the automation processes that you've set up. So an example of this is having a Google Drive folder for receipts, connect that in your tables. If you try this out after the meeting, you go to add a new table, connect to a Google Drive folder, and then you'll see a couple different options there. One of which is like the Document AI option. You can connect to a receipt folder, and then try adding images of receipts to that folder. There's more detail here to go into, but Sarah, I think that's the specifics of your question. I think there's a thread that we'll be able to follow up with more specifically and understand exactly where you're bumping into problems there. But from a high level, I think that's what you're referring to. And just to confirm though, that the data is never really imported into AppSheet. It's just connected. And so that's one, I think for people who are newer, just one thing to be careful of is that data will always exist back in that originally connected source, whether it's a folder or a spreadsheet or a database. And so having that open on the side as you're building your application can be helpful to just see how the interactions work. I think that Sarah, again, we'll look for, we'll jump into that thread and provide a little more follow-up, but Lauren, is this, those were sort of some of the questions curated from the community, and now with only 10 minutes left, we can switch over to these comments.
Yes, exactly. So thank you everyone for adding your comments into the chat. Now we will go through as many questions as we can that you've submitted today. So Peter, please show those that you want to address, and then we'll let the team answer them from there.
Yeah, so this is, first of all, just to acknowledge, this is not enough time. There are a ton of awesome questions in here. And so I wanted to first flag, Lauren, we will have the ability to, I think, follow up with some of these in the community independently.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to run through and okay, let's see, showing some of them. Let me, and sorry, part of this is me also just getting familiar with new StreamYard, our new tools here. So this is related to some of the pricing, but also a question around text detection. I kind of thought this was an interesting question, and I'll share my screen, but I wanted to point to just a couple things as far as text detection and OCR. Israel, this is I think you're alluding to the intelligence tab and sort of the pricing implications. I think this is the pricing implications of using that OCR feature, but I also wanted to just point to a couple different ways that you can detect text, because OCR is one of them. So I think if everyone can see my screen right now, what I think Israel is getting at is in OCR models, and I'm sorry I don't have a good OCR example to share right offhand, but in intelligence and in OCR models, this is something where you can use Vision AI on the back end to develop these fairly straightforward OCR models. So for example, if the goal for your app is to take pictures of, say, like product tags, and those product tags are standardized, then you can use an existing folder of images of those product tags in order to train a model in AppSheet and then extract some specific fields from it to use in your app. So I want to take a second. We'll again follow up with this in more detail on sort of the different implications. This is one really good way of extracting text from images or files uploaded in your app. I wanted to also point out, because it's oftentimes overlooked, I'm just pulling up a random, let's see, actually, I just wanted to pull up the expression assistant to point to another example of how you can extract text. And that is the next time you're in the expression assistant or in the help files, in the help documentation, you go to help.appsheet.com and you just search for extract. There are some really useful expressions here that allow you to extract things like prices, objects like prices or numbers or phone numbers, choices, dates, times, domains, so like website domains, emails, hashtags, a variety of really interesting tools there for extracting specific data points from a body of text. There's also the ability to just extract text, a bulk amount of text from the image itself. And then you can extract more specific fields from that extracted text. So I just wanted to call out that example as well as another way that is similar to the OCR functionality, but can just be done in a different method there.
Peter, we may need to do lightning round, 10-second answers.
I took it. I know. And now I worry about. All right, Praveen, I'll throw one to you. There's one question around. It's vague, but it just says, "What about increasing performance?"
Yeah. So the quick answer on this is we have a team of about mostly, I suppose, you're talking about sync performance, which is a big concern because you can set up apps to have terrible performance. You have to read data from all these different sources. We have a team of 4 engineers who are primarily working on improving sync performance. And so that's a top concern. And I'm hoping we will see improvements in this in H1. It won't improve everything across the board. There's going to be specialized cases where it does improve stuff.
I think this one got covered actually in the comments from the standpoint that this is something that you can do today.
You can do this today, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, John. Yeah, actually, honestly, most of our effort is, like I said, foundational stuff. It's being able to deploy multiple regions. I know there were some other questions about that. It's like this performance work. It's stability work. There's a lot of work that we don't go and post every time, but about addressing any edge case security issues, for example, or anything that arises. So there's a lot of infrastructural things that improve and stabilize existing features. And some of the work we touched on desktop UI, for example, is really going to be about, again, improving existing capabilities rather than new stuff.
And just an extension of that, and I wanted to make a comment for submitting bug requests. I think that that's something that Lauren and Andrew we need to revisit in the community, because I think the labels are not. We need to think about the labels and just ensuring that method is there. I think that right now it's not entirely clear in the community how people can contribute those issues. Where previously we did have a method for doing that. So thanks for pointing that out, John.
Yeah, what's really happening in AMP Mail is effectively it's like rendering a little piece of the app inside the mail. And so it really depends on what that message rendering has to do. What we have launched is a V1 of this. We have active work to improve that. So that's ongoing work, full-time engineer working on it. So I'm hoping, in fact, it's an area we're quite excited about improving. Yeah, this is quite a concern. It's been a concern in that you create these bots, you delete them, but the tasks stick around. There's, in fact, preview or internal prototypes of a means to address this. So absolutely not something. This absolutely is on the radar. It's a little non-trivial to solve. So we've been working through that.
Let's see this from Mike. I know this is kind of a high level topic. It doesn't have a real specific answer, but
Matt, you want to take this?
Yeah, I think what's exciting about AppScript is it allows you to sort of expand beyond what the capabilities of the platform are today, right? So we're starting with being able to call AppScript tasks, but also what we hear from users in enterprises is they have tons of AppScript floating around and they don't have any way of controlling it and managing it and aggregating it. And the AppScript folks we know have plans of their own to sort of help with that. But we see something that we can do is help provide a framework for both governance and execution and kind of ongoing operations of things like AppScript, starting with tasks. In the future, perhaps you'll be able to run AppScript in other places inside of AppSheet, but no current plans today. But we see that as kind of the when you need to go further than what you can do with expressions or with the built-in capabilities, AppScript is a logical extension of how you would do that.
I think this is somewhat related to the low code conversation.
Yeah. So right now we have webhooks, which is a way to call out to external APIs. We don't have an ability to bring the results back and put them back into your data. And that's a long-standing limitation. And it's currently actually, we have the same limitation with calling out AppScript methods. There's active work. I've seen design discussion about this topic. We know that's valuable to bring this back, but you have to figure out how to do this in a generic way. And that's a little non-trivial. So I don't want to promise something here. It's just difficult to do in a generic way.
I know for the sake of time here, I'll throw up one more. I think this is just teeing up. John, thanks for posting this. Just to ensure, for those of you that don't know, help.appsheet.com is and will continue to be sort of the repository of knowledge base articles. For those of you that know Steve in the community, he is responsible for a lot of those insights and knowledge, but then a lot of the team is contributing and updating those articles there. There'll be updates in sort of how those articles are published and where they're hosted, but that will always be sort of the source of truth for documentation and help resources. And I think, Lauren, I know we're at time. We can keep answering questions, but what will be the best way to follow up on some of these still pending questions?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for all of the questions. Of course, we weren't able to get to all of them today, but as we said, please add them to the community. We'll do our best to follow up and add them as well and to follow up with you. But if there were any unanswered questions that you had, please add them to the AppSheet Q&A forum in the community. That is that top link that you see here on this slide, and we will make sure to get back to you with responses. So yep, please follow that first link. And also just wanted to call out that if you have any feedback or suggestions for future office hours, we'd love to hear from you. So if you could check out that link, that third link down for office hours feedback, we will also include that in the community. We'd love to hear from you on that. And finally, lastly, just to say that our next office hours will be on Thursday, March 3rd. So it'll be on a monthly basis. So stay tuned, again, in the community for more information about that and how to join. So with that, any final thoughts from anyone? Peter, Praveen, anyone from the team before we close out?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm always really grateful when I get to work on a product that has a really invested and dedicated community, and I'm looking forward to having our product team be a strong presence here. And I believe me, I also realize that it can be frustrating when it feels like there are things shipping that are not the things that are always being talked about in the community. But I want to make it clear that we consider you folks an incredibly valuable channel, an incredibly important part of our strategy. Yeah, I think that was my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I'll second that. And I just want to also, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Praveen, for joining, and thank you especially, Lauren, for putting this all together and for kind of taking the lead on these office hours moving forward. And really excited, especially for these next office hours, we can dig deeper into some of the questions. So excited to participate and have others on the team join as well.
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to it, and for seeing you all in the meantime and before March 3rd in the community. So we'll all be in touch, and thank you again, everyone, for joining and for the AppSheet team. All right.